The Wyoming hills stretched out like a rumpled, sun-baked canvas, an endless expanse of sagebrush, red rock, and distant, snow-capped peaks that pierced the impossibly blue sky. It was a beauty both stark and profound, a landscape that demanded respect and offered little in the way of comfort. For years, these hills had been Jack Harmon's world, a silent, stoic companion to his equally silent, stoic existence. He rode them almost daily, his weathered face a testament to countless sunrises and sunsets, his eyes holding the kind of deep, quiet knowing that only comes from true solitude. But on this particular crisp autumn afternoon, the predictable rhythm of his life was about to be irrevocably shattered by an unexpected discovery, a fragile spark in the vast emptiness. Jack Harmon was a man carved from the very same Wyoming landscape he called home. A cowboy through and through, his roots ran deep in Cody, though his soul had felt uprooted the day he lost his wife. Her memory was a constant, bitter-sweet companion, a whisper on the wind, a shadow in the corners of his small, tidy ranch home. He hadn't sought company since, finding solace instead in the unforgiving routines of ranch life, the scent of horse and leather, the endless chores that kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering too far into the past. His world had shrunk, by choice and by grief, to the familiar contours of his property and the unwavering presence of Silver, his magnificent mustang. Silver wasn't just a horse, he was a confidant, a partner, a living echo of the freedom Jack had once felt, before loss had anchored him so firmly to the earth. The mustang's coat, the color of moonlight on newly fallen snow, gleamed under the autumn sun as they navigated a familiar ridge, the only sound the rhythmic thud of hooves and the creak of saddle leather. The air was sharp, carrying the first hint of winter, a chill that seemed to seep into Jack's bones. He'd been checking fences, a task as old as ranching itself, when Silver, usually so placid and responsive, suddenly tensed. His ears pricked forward, then flattened against his skull, a low whinny rumbling in his chest. Before Jack could react, the powerful animal bolted, not in a panicked flight, but with an urgent, almost purposeful drive, towards a section of fallen barbed wire fence Jack had yet to mend. Jack, caught off guard, gripped the reins, fighting to control the surge of power beneath him, his mind racing to understand the mustang's uncharacteristic behavior. Silver didn't stop until he was practically nudging the twisted wires, his nostrils flaring, a soft, distressed nicker escaping him. And then Jack saw her, tangled in the fallen fence, a small, still figure, partially obscured by a thicket of brush. A girl. She couldn't have been more than 10 or 11, her clothes torn, her face streaked with dirt and tears, a deep gash weeping crimson on her arm. Her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto Jack's, pleading and wary all at once. She was whimpering, a tiny, broken sound that sliced through the vast silence of the hills. Jack dismounted quickly, his boots crunching on dry leaves, his heart hammering against his ribs. He approached slowly, hands open, trying not to spook her further. "Hey there, little one," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, a sound he hadn't heard himself use in years. "Are you hurt?" She flinched, trying to pull away from the sharp barbs, a choked sob escaping her. She couldn't explain her presence. She could barely speak. All she could do was tremble, a fragile, injured bird caught in a trap. This vast, empty land had just delivered something utterly unexpected, something that threatened to upend the quiet order of Jack's solitary world. Before we dive deeper into Jack's story and unravel the mystery of this girl, please hit that subscribe button to join our community and never miss an adventure. News of the girl's discovery, carried initially by a ranch hand who spotted Jack's frantic return to his homestead earlier, traveled through Cody like a prairie fire fueled by dry gossip. It reached the dusty corners of the general store, echoed within the dim confines of the saloon, and resonated with a particular intensity among the neighboring ranchers. Their reactions were a complex tapestry of curiosity, suspicion, and a deeply ingrained resentment towards anything that disrupted the familiar, almost sacred rhythm of their isolated lives. Jack, a man who had intentionally withdrawn from their world years ago, was suddenly thrust back into its unforgiving spotlight. The hushed speculation quickly turned into open discussion, then escalated into outright propositions. Old Man Peterson, whose land bordered Jack's to the north, made a point of riding directly to Jack's fence line, leaning casually against his saddle horn. His eyes, narrowed by years of sun and mistrust, drifted from Jack to the silhouette of the quiet child within the cabin. "Jack, you know how these things go." Peterson's voice was gravelly, devoid of any genuine concern. "Could be trouble. Vagrant. Best to just send her on her way. The sheriff's got enough on his plate." His words hung in the crisp autumn air, a thinly veiled warning, suggesting a convenient, silent resolution to the girl's mystery, one that wouldn't involve the community's resources, or more importantly, its uncomfortable attention. Other ranchers mirrored Peterson's sentiment, though perhaps less directly. They spoke of the burden, the unknown risks, the disruption to the established peace. Hints were dropped about a county orphanage miles away, or even more chillingly, a quiet, almost forgotten road out of town. Jack felt the weight of their collective distrust pressing down on him. He had always been an outsider, even before Sarah's passing intensified his solitude. Now, sheltering this nameless waif, he was once again the subject of their scrutiny, a man challenging their unspoken rules. The fear of renewed loss, a phantom pain that still clutched at his heart, warred with a nascent, unfamiliar sense of duty. He could have easily, perhaps even understandably, followed their advice. He could have called the county, explained his bizarre discovery, and allowed the authorities to handle it. But the image of the girl's wide, terrified eyes, the way her small hand had instinctively grasped Silver's mane, had etched itself into his resolve. He saw not a burden, but a vulnerable soul, a child in need, and something within him, long dormant, stirred. Despite his initial reluctance, a deeply ingrained sense of compassion, a leftover ember from his past life, flickered to life. He couldn't simply turn her out, so he took her in, at least temporarily. The first few days were a study in cautious silence. His small cabin, once filled only with the echoes of his own isolation, now held the soft rustle of new life. He cooked simple meals, stew and cornbread, placing them before her with quiet dignity. He tried to coax information from her, gently, patiently. "What's your name, child?" he'd ask, his voice softened by an unfamiliar tenderness. She would only stare, her eyes reflecting a profound, unreadable trauma. "Where are your folks from?" He'd try, pointing vaguely towards the distant hills. Her lips would tremble, but no words came. Only her gaze, a deep, unsettling blue, offered any response. Each unanswered question added another layer to the enigma. Yet each silent meal, each shared moment of quiet presence, chipped away at Jack's hardened exterior, replacing his fear with a burgeoning sense of responsibility. He felt an undeniable, almost dangerous pull to protect her, to uncover her story, regardless of the whispers and warnings from the world outside. The girl, still a fragile shadow, remained largely silent, her eyes wide with an unspoken terror that made any direct questioning feel like an invasion. She offered fragmented words, gestures that conveyed more fear than meaning, and the occasional whimper that tore at Jack's heart. Each attempt to coax out her name, where she came from, or who her family might be, met with a vacant stare or a panicked flinch. She was a mystery wrapped in trauma, a small, lost soul that deepened the enigma of her sudden appearance in the harsh Wyoming landscape. This prolonged silence, this impenetrable wall she'd built around herself, only intensified Jack's internal struggle. He was accustomed to the predictable rhythm of his solitary life, a life carefully constructed to avoid the sharp edges of emotional pain. Now, this child, utterly dependent and utterly vulnerable, threatened to dismantle everything. He found himself standing at the crossroads of compassion and self-preservation. The fear of opening his heart again, of experiencing the searing agony of loss that had consumed him after his wife's passing, was a palpable weight in his chest. He had meticulously purged his life of anything that could lead to such profound hurt again, choosing solitude as his shield. Yet, the small, shivering form of the girl, her hand unconsciously grasping his finger sometimes when he brought her food, ignited a forgotten warmth within him. He saw a mirror of his own past vulnerability in her eyes, a reflection of the deep-seated need for protection he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The undeniable, almost primal urge to shield her, to mend her broken spirit, began to erode the carefully constructed walls around his heart. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, Jack's stagnant life began to shift. The silent ranch, once a monument to his grief, started to hum with a faint echo of life. He found himself humming old lullabies he hadn't thought of in decades, songs his wife used to sing. He took a little more care with his cooking, remembering the simple joy of preparing a meal for another. He even started brushing Silver a little longer, the rhythmic strokes of the brush a calming balm for his frayed nerves. He caught himself smiling at small things. The way the girl's eyes lit up at the sight of a stray kitten, or her tentative, quiet laughter when Silver nudged her hand. These fleeting moments, these tiny embers of joy, were glimpses of a future he thought forever lost, a connection he hadn't dared to hope for. A new purpose, raw and unfamiliar, began to take root in his soul, slowly pushing aside the long-held bitterness. Meanwhile, the ripples of the girl's discovery spread like wildfire through Cody, evolving from whispers to outright grumbling. The community's unease intensified with each passing day. Ranchers, their faces etched with suspicion, started to voice their concerns more openly. There were direct confrontations, not aggressive, but laced with a thinly veiled disapproval. Old Man Peterson, a staunch traditionalist from the neighboring spread, cornered Jack at the feed store. "Jack, you're a good man, but this ain't wise," he'd rumbled, his eyes narrowed. "Bringing in a stray like that, no papers, no story, it just invites trouble. Best to let the authorities handle it. Send her off to Cheyenne." Others offered similar sentiments, their words disguised as neighborly advice, but laden with an unmistakable undercurrent of fear and distrust. They hinted at potential legal troubles, social repercussions, and the disruption of the town's quiet, predictable order. The pressure was mounting, a quiet but relentless force trying to push Jack back into his shell, trying to convince him to relinquish the fragile hope that had just begun to blossom. One crisp morning, as Jack was patiently braiding the girl's surprisingly long, dark hair, an unexpected domesticity he had stumbled into, a small, faded wooden button fell from her worn dress. It wasn't just any button. It was crudely carved with a distinct, almost childish depiction of a soaring eagle. The artwork was crude, but unmistakable, a symbol often associated with a particular, fiercely private homestead nestled deep within the treacherous foothills of the Absaroka Range, far beyond the usual grazing lands. He'd heard whispers of the reclusive family who lived there, an old-world German immigrant family known for their meticulous craftsmanship and their absolute avoidance of modern society. He remembered a story from his youth about how they marked their belongings with such an emblem. The girl, seeing his gaze fix on the button, mumbled a single word, barely audible. Adler. Eagle. A flicker of recognition, a spark in her otherwise guarded eyes, confirmed his suspicion. It was a minuscule detail, yet it was the most substantial clue he'd gleaned in weeks, a fragile thread connecting her to a possible past. But Adler was also simply the German word for eagle, a frustrating ambiguity that could be coincidence or destiny. Armed with this single, ambiguous clue, Jack began his own quiet investigation. He couldn't risk alarming the girl or drawing unwanted attention from the increasingly wary townspeople. His approach was subtle, a series of seemingly casual conversations with old-timers at the general store, a few pointed questions disguised as idle chatter at the livestock auction. He mentioned the distinctive carving, feigning curiosity about its origins, watching their reactions, sifting through their vague responses for any glimmer of recognition. He learned that the Adler family, as they were sometimes called, had recently suffered a series of misfortunes, a harsh winter that took a significant portion of their small herd, and then, more recently, a fire that had ravaged part of their remote cabin. The details were scarce, shrouded in the isolation they so carefully cultivated, but the timeline felt eerily coincidental with the girl's appearance. He observed the subtle shifts in the townsfolk's eyes when he brought up the Absarokas. A quick glance away, a sudden change of subject. It was clear that the Adler family, for all their reclusiveness, still held a certain mystique and perhaps even fear among the locals. No one seemed keen to discuss them or their affairs. This quiet probing, this deliberate step back into the world of human interaction and subtle interrogation, inadvertently stirred up a powerful torrent of Jack's own buried memories. Each time he saw a family unit, a mother comforting a child, or a husband and wife sharing a quiet laugh over coffee, the phantom ache of his own loss intensified. He remembered the meticulous details of his wife's hands, the way she hummed as she cooked, the scent of her hair, the countless conversations they'd shared planning a future that had brutally vanished. He saw his own daughter in the girl's guarded eyes, a child he had never had the chance to raise. Confronting the possibility of this girl having a family, a past, opened the floodgates to his own grief, a raw, unbidden sorrow he thought he had meticulously walled off. The pain was sharp, almost unbearable at times, yet, strangely, It felt less paralyzing than it had before. He wasn't drowning in it. He was navigating it, driven by a purpose beyond himself. The girl's story, incomplete and haunting, had become inextricably linked to his own journey towards healing, forcing him to acknowledge not just her vulnerability, but his own profound capacity for love and for enduring the pain that inevitably came with it. His investigation was no longer just for her. It was for him too, a winding path back to a life he'd abandoned. Jack's quiet investigation, born of a father's protective instinct he barely remembered possessing, inadvertently stirred a hornet's nest. His subtle questions about missing children reports in neighboring counties, his careful sounding out of the few traveling salesmen who passed through Cody, had not gone unnoticed. Whispers, once confined to the rancher's gossip, now took on a more menacing tone. One evening, after a long day of mending fences, a bullet whizzed past his head, embedding itself with a sickening thud into the wooden post beside him. It was a clear, chilling message, delivered with deadly precision. This wasn't a warning from concerned neighbors anymore. It was a direct threat, a stark declaration from someone who wanted the girl's past, and perhaps her very existence, to remain buried forever. The incident ignited a cold fury in Jack, replacing the lingering uncertainty with an unyielding resolve. He no longer questioned his commitment. The bullet had solidified it. His ranch, once a sanctuary of solitude, had become a battleground. He knew he couldn't face this alone. The memory of the bullet, leaving a splintered scar on the post and an even deeper one on his peace of mind, pushed him towards an unlikely ally. Sarah Jenkins, the town's shrewd yet compassionate librarian, was the first person he sought out. She possessed a keen mind and an encyclopedic knowledge of local lore, and more importantly, a fiercely independent spirit that refused to be swayed by small-town prejudice. Sarah, hearing his account of the shooting and seeing the grim determination in his eyes, didn't hesitate. She had always sensed the undercurrents of the town, the secrets buried beneath its quiet facade. For her, helping Jack was not just about aiding a friend, but about upholding a moral truth that transcended the fear gripping Cody. Together, they began to work in a clandestine partnership. Sarah, using her network of book club ladies and churchgoers, started to discreetly gather information, piecing together fragments of local rumors and overlooked details. Jack, meanwhile, fortified his ranch, setting up rudimentary tripwires and keeping a watchful eye on the perimeter. He taught the girl to recognize certain sounds, to hide in a designated spot should trouble arise. His training as a soldier, long dormant, resurfaced with an almost primal urgency. He was a protector now, and he would not fail. Their combined efforts soon bore fruit, though not without further peril. Sarah discovered a disturbing pattern. A series of small, isolated ranches on the fringes of the county had recently changed hands under rather hurried and questionable circumstances. Owners, often elderly or struggling, had suddenly sold their properties for far less than market value, disappearing without a trace, their disappearances explained away as moving to the city or joining family. What made it suspicious was the common thread of a shadowy land developer, a man named Silas Thorne, known for his ruthless tactics and his ability to make inconvenient truths vanish. Thorne had always been an outsider, a figure of suspicion whose business dealings were shrouded in secrecy. One frigid night, as Jack and Sarah reviewed their findings, A car without headlights slowly approached the Harmon ranch. Jack, alerted by the subtle flick of Silver's ears and the absence of familiar engine sounds, grabbed his rifle. He watched from the shadows as two large men, their faces obscured by ski masks, began to systematically disable his outer fence, clearly intending to gain entry. This wasn't a random act of vandalism, it was a calculated escalation. The stakes had been raised irreversibly. The men moved with a chilling efficiency that spoke of professional experience. Jack held his breath, waiting for the opportune moment. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from fear for himself, but for the small, innocent life asleep inside his home. He knew now, with absolute certainty, that he was fighting not just for the girl's past, but for her very future. He had to stop them. Their presence confirmed their suspicions, intertwining the girl's mysterious arrival with Thorne's sinister land acquisitions. This close call, the near breach of his sanctuary, solidified the grim reality. They were directly in the crosshairs of a dangerous individual or group. The line between inquiry and open conflict had been violently crossed. The relentless pressure from the town, however, was about to become the least of Jack's worries. As the sun dipped below the rugged peaks, casting long, ominous shadows across the ranch, a dark sedan, its windows tinted, careened down the dusty track leading to Jack's isolated home. It was not a vehicle seen commonly in these parts, its sleek, urban lines a stark contrast to the weathered pickups and sturdy horses of Cody. Jack, sitting on his porch, teaching the girl. Lily, as she had finally managed to whisper her name, how to carve a small wooden bird, felt an immediate chill crawl up his spine. Silver, normally placid, whinnied nervously in his paddock, pawing at the earth. Two figures emerged from the car, men in dark suits, their demeanor as cold and unyielding as the Wyoming winter. One, tall and gaunt with eyes that seemed to miss nothing, carried an air of calculated menace. The other, broader and brutish, moved with a silent, heavy purpose. Jack stood, slowly placing the carving knife on the porch rail, shielding Lily instinctively with his body. The men introduced themselves as representatives, their voices smooth but devoid of warmth, claiming to be searching for a runaway ward from a distant, unspecified facility. Their story was vague, their questions pointed, yet they avoided direct eye contact with Jack, their gazes darting towards Lily, who now clung tightly to Jack's leg, trembling. Jack's protective instincts flared, overriding years of carefully cultivated apathy. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that these men were not what they claimed. The way the taller one's eyes lingered on Lily's small, silver locket, now visible beneath her collar, set off alarm bells in Jack's mind. He remembered Lily's fragmented whispers about a bad man and a shiny thing. This was no coincidence. A tense standoff ensued. The men, growing impatient with Jack's stonewalling, began to circle, their movements predatory. The larger man made a sudden lunge towards Lily, his hand outstretched. In that instant, something snapped within Jack. He moved with a speed he hadn't possessed in years, his old cowboy reflexes kicking in. He intercepted the man, a surprisingly powerful shove sending him stumbling back. The gaunt man, seeing his partner falter, pulled out a glint of metal from inside his jacket. Not a badge, but a switchblade. The confrontation escalated into a desperate struggle. Jack, fueled by a primal need to protect Lily, fought with a ferocity that stunned even himself. He dodged a wild swing, landed a solid punch to the gaunt man's jaw, and wrestled the larger man into a headlock, using skills honed from years of roping recalcitrant cattle. Lily, witnessing the raw violence, let out a scream, a sound that tore at the very fabric of Jack's being. But it wasn't just a scream of terror. It was a scream of recognition, of remembered pain. And in that moment, as the larger man struggled beneath Jack's hold, Lily finally found her voice. He took it. He took Mama's letters," she shrieked, her small finger pointing accusingly at the gaunt man, who was now scrambling to his feet, blood trickling from his lip. "And the ranch. They want the ranch." Her words, though still fragmented, painted a harrowing picture. This wasn't about a runaway. It was about inheritance, about a coordinated effort to silence a child who knew too much. The representatives were thugs, sent to retrieve Lily and whatever information she might possess. The silver locket, the shiny thing, was a clue, perhaps containing deeds or other critical documents. The gaunt man, now visibly shaken by Lily's outburst, made a desperate dash back to the car. Jack, releasing the gasping brute, made a definitive stand, his weathered face hard with resolve. He wasn't just a reclusive widower anymore. He was a protector, a guardian who had found a purpose far greater than his own solitude. He grabbed a forgotten shotgun from beside the door, its cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of the wooden bird carved moments before. "You're not taking her," Jack growled, his voice low and dangerous, "and you're not getting away with this." His transformation was complete, a phoenix rising from the ashes of his grief, ready to fight for justice and the innocent. The gaunt man, seeing the shotgun leveled at him, froze. His companion, still recovering from Jack's unexpectedly fierce assault, stumbled backward, hands raised in surrender. Lily's raw, accusatory cries had broken not only their composure, but also the facade of their supposed authority. The community, drawn by the commotion and now spilling out of their homes and the general store, watched in stunned silence as the drama unfolded. Whispers quickly turned to gasps as they pieced together Lily's words and the men's obvious, sinister intentions. Sheriff Brody, a man of quiet integrity and sharp observation, had arrived just as Lily's frantic accusations about the ranch and her mother's letters echoed across the dusty street. He'd seen the shift in Jack, the steel in his eyes, and the desperate fear in the men who now stood exposed. With a calm authority that belied the chaos, Brody stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his holstered sidearm. "Looks like we have some explaining to do, gentlemen," he stated, his voice firm, cutting through the tense atmosphere. "And it won't be happening out here." The two men, realizing their game was up, offered no resistance as Brody's deputies moved in. Lily, still clutching Jack's leg, watched them being led away, her small body trembling, but her eyes now holding a flicker of triumph amidst the terror. The community, initially skeptical and wary of Jack's unconventional choice to take in the girl, now saw the truth laid bare. Jack hadn't been foolish. He had been principled. His unwavering commitment had not only protected Lily, but it also unveiled a deep-seated injustice. Faces that had once held suspicion now showed genuine relief, even admiration. Several townsfolk approached, offering comfort to Lily and quiet apologies to Jack for their earlier doubts. In the days that followed, the full extent of the scheme unraveled. The men were indeed disreputable, distant relatives of Lily's late father, attempting to illegally seize her family ranch, a valuable piece of land near a burgeoning mineral deposit. Lily's mother, knowing their true intentions, had hidden crucial documents within the silver locket and entrusted her daughter with its secret, hoping she would eventually find someone to trust. The letters Lily mentioned were her mother's desperate pleas for help, detailing the relatives' escalating threats and nefarious plans. Jack, with Brody's help, worked tirelessly to ensure Lily's rights were protected, navigating legal complexities with a newfound determination he never knew he possessed. The resolution brought a peace that permeated both the town and Jack's quiet ranch. Lily's future was secured, the ranch rightfully hers, and a trust established for her well-being. But more importantly, she found a true home. Jack, no longer a recluse defined by his grief, embraced his role as her guardian, her protector, and her family. His capacity for hope and connection, long buried under layers of sorrow, had been irrevocably restored. The wooden bird, a symbol of their initial tentative bond, sat proudly on his mantelpiece, a constant reminder of how a lost girl and a determined horse had cracked open his solitary world. One crisp autumn afternoon, Jack and Lily sat on the porch swing, watching Silver graze peacefully in the pasture. Lily, her laughter now bright and unburdened, pointed to a hawk circling high above. Jack smiled, a genuine, content smile that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. He had found purpose beyond his past, a future interwoven with a child's vibrant spirit. His world, once a monochrome landscape of memory and routine, had blossomed into a tapestry of color and love. The old cowboy, once lost in his solitude, had finally found his way home, guided there by a little girl and a wise mustang. This journey of resilience and rediscovery is a testament to the unexpected paths life can take. Thank you for watching this story unfold. If you were moved by Jack's journey, his unwavering commitment, and Lily's courage, please like this video, share it with others, and don't forget to subscribe for more compelling narratives. What challenges do you think